All right, everybody, welcome. It's great to have you all here. Hopefully you can all hear me now loud and clear. I'm actually gonna put my camera on as well. Okay. And you should be able to see my screen too. All good? Okay. So welcome to tonight's presentation, everyone. A little bit of background about us for those who are uh, new to our presentation. Our company is called Parco. That stands for Pension Americans Retirement Company. And we do retirement and financial planning for anybody with a pension, but especially government employees. You should be able to see the screen now. We work with federal employees, no matter what stage of their career that they're in. For some, it's folks who are early on in their careers and wanting to make sure they've taken advantage of all the benefits that are offered at the beginning of federal employment. Then we work with a lot of folks mid-career, wanting to make sure they're on the right track. I imagine that's for many of you tonight. And then also folks at the end of their careers trying to make sure that they've put all the right planning in place. So no matter what stage you're in, we help folks do all the planning and strategize their retirements. So a couple ground rules for our webinars, as always. If you do have questions, ask them within the chat window or within the Q&A window. Myself or Lauren will be here to help answer any questions that you have. And then throughout the presentation tonight, you'll notice a couple things. There's an opportunity for you to scan this QR code or go to app.goparco. If you go to app.goparco.com, you will be able to log in, create an account, and you can schedule a time to meet with one of our teammates one-on-one. You can also start doing some of the planning that we're talking about today and in the presentation on your own, right from the portal. We just launched it not too long ago, and we've been getting a lot of great feedback. People really seem to like using it. And so if there's anything we can do to improve it, always let us know. So tonight we're going to be talking about, do you have enough saved for retirement? This is a question that we help folks answer. It's maybe one of the most fundamental questions that people have when it comes to retirement. And so tonight we're going to be talking about that. We're going to talk about the savings problem that face not only federal employees and retirees, but all Americans. We'll talk about the benefits of compound growth. We'll talk about sequence of returns risk and how volatility and risk and your risk tolerance can change as you approach retirement or you enter the distribution stage of your career or your life. We'll talk about bridging the gap and how federal employees are a little bit different than most Americans. We'll talk about different retirement scenarios that federal employees and government employees can plan around. And we'll wrap up with some key takeaways and how to get started. So let's talk a little bit about the savings problem that all Americans face right now. So here's a I'm not going to set this up as a poll, but does anybody here have any idea how much the average American has saved for retirement? Well, what's kind of crazy is that, if you look at, let's say, the people over 50 years old, just about 50% of them have over $10,000 saved for retirement. A much smaller percentage of that, about 20%, have over $100,000 saved, and an even smaller portion of those folks have over $500,000 saved. Now, for most federal employees, because you have a TSP, because you have your 401k, and because you get an automatic match or you get a matching contribution, it can be possible for you to have saved quite a bit of money in that TSP. So federal employees, because they have that 401k and because your careers tend to be pretty long, tend to skew toward having more saved than the average American. That's just kind of reality of the situation. Further, when you look at like how many Americans have over $100,000 saved for most, it's not common. It's certainly not the most common thing, or it's not the plurality of Americans that have over $100,000 saved. So the retirement situation for many Americans is really challenged. And when people think about retiring and whether or not they have enough saved, sometimes they fall into a couple camps. There's a couple different situations that can happen. When people ask us, hey, like, who are the people who are best off in retirement? Well, there's usually like two extreme situations, right? There's the guys that, work, then retire, and then they pass away the next day. Now, it's very morbid and bleak, but from a retirement planning perspective, they made it as easy as possible because they didn't have anything to say. I remember I've heard this joke before where it's like, hey, I've got enough money to retire if I live through next Thursday. right? Like that's a common joke. And then there's folks all the way onto the right that maybe they know they're getting or they have a large inheritance that's come to them, a huge windfall, so they don't have to worry about money in the same way that most Americans do. But most Americans then tend to fall somewhere in the middle, right? They want to, you know, reduce the odds that they run out of money, right? They want to make sure that they've got enough money saved for retirement. And they'd also, at the same time, which means they need to work, but at the same time, they'd like to work for as few years as possible to achieve that goal, right? That's kind of like the seesaw or the trade-off that people are trying to navigate. And when Allianz Life put out a survey, they're a massive insurance company and life insurance company, they found that 64% of people worry more about running out of money than they do about dying. Like the thing that they're most worried about is actually, do they have enough money to last their retirement, not, you know, their retirement end, which I think kind of really paints in stark reality, like how important this is for a lot of folks. Maybe this is how you feel. So that's sort of like the background on how things are looking and how Americans and how a lot of federal employees are thinking, retirees are thinking about saving for retirement. Then we wanted to highlight, just how advantageous compound growth is. Einstein called compound growth and compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. And especially for folks that are maybe a little bit younger, that are trying to make the most out of their savings throughout their career, people ask us all the time, hey, does it make a difference? I actually had this conversation with somebody today. Well, it always makes a difference to save. And let's take a quick example here. Let's say that if I just saved $100,000 per month, how much could that grow? Well, it depends on a couple things. First, how long you contribute and your rate of return. And so suppose you saved $100 a month for the last 40 years or for 40 years. Over that 40-year period, just assuming your contributions were being put away and there was no growth, over that 40-year period, you would have contributed $48,000 into that account. And so your balance at the end of that time would be $48,000. However, if let's say that you've got some growth, let's say like in the C fund, like S&P 500 returns, let's say 10% compounded annually, that $48,000 compounding would have grown to over $500,000. And that's just contributing $100 a month during that time period, getting that 10% growth rate. It's kind of wild. You can see why Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world. Now, what's really important, and sometimes people will say, we say this all the time here at Parco, more important than timing the market, because sometimes people will say, hey, should I move into the market or out of the market? Hey, should you be more aggressive or conservative? It's way more important to have time in the market. It's to have those extra years of compounding. Because if you look here, for instance, after 30 years, that $100 per month contributing is only $200,000. It's only in those next 10 years where it really starts to shoot up to that $500,000 number. So time in the market, having money in the market, having money invested to grow is what matters the most. So that's if you're invested in the market. That's if you're trying to compound capital, especially if you don't plan to touch it and you want to save for the long term. But then there's this concept and this thing you have to face, especially when you approach retirement, where you're planning to start using your money, and this idea of sequence of return risk. So what we've done here is we've shown the S&P 500 returns for the 20-year period from the year 2000 to the year 2019, so 20 years. The left-hand column here shows exactly what the S&P 500 did. The middle column has that same return profile, but it's sorted from best to worst, high to low. And then this other column shows it from worst to best. So same returns, just in a different order. So this graph shows how the S&P 500 actually performed over that 20-year period. This is the annual returns. Then it shows them from best to worst. So you can actually see there's more good return years than bad in that 20-year period. And then here it is from worst to best. So when you're not planning to take money out of your account, again, we just talked about this, time in the market is what matters way more than timing the market. So this example here, a person started with $200,000. That money grew in the C fund or the S&P 500 over that 20-year period, and that by the end of that 20-year period, that 200,000 had grown to $648,000. Now the question is, what would have happened if those returns, instead of how they actually happened, what if the good returns had happened at the beginning and the bad returns had happened at the end? What would the shape of that return profile look like? Well, it would look something like this. It really rockets up because you have these really great returns, but then it converges back down to that same ending value. The same is true as if you had the good returns at the beginning and the bad returns at the beginning and the good returns at the end. Yes, it dips in the beginning, but then it rockets up to match because the average return of that set is the same regardless of the order that those returns happen. And importantly, you're not taking out any withdrawals. You're not taking any money out of that account. Now, when you approach retirement and you're starting to think, hey, I need to start taking money out of my account, how does this change things? Well, this is where the sequence of returns actually really matters. So again, same situation, exact same, only you instead are taking out $500 a month. It starts with 200,000, invest in the S&P 500. You see how it dips a lot in 2008 and 2009 there, but the ending value is $305,000. Now, if the best returns had happened at the beginning, because you're taking out that regular $500 per month to supplement your lifestyle in retirement, if the best returns had happened at the beginning, it rockets up, like we mentioned. But since that $500 is a relatively smaller portion of your balance, it means there's more dollars there to compound. And so the ending value is over $500,000. Now, we would love if for every person that we help plan for retirement, we could say, hey, look, we know we were going to have the best 10 years of your retirement, best 10 years for the whole time you're retired. The first half of your retirement, you're going to have the best market returns, and the second half are going to be the worst. We would love to be able to plan, but we can't know that. Because just as much as we wish that we could predict where the good returns happen, we really want to avoid where those bad returns happen. Because if those bad returns happen and you're planning to take those withdrawals, you can actually end up running out of money after a 20-year period because that big dip right at the beginning of that retirement, when you're starting to take that $500 out, means that you're taking out a much larger portion of your balance. And so it leaves fewer dollars to compound and the account's exhausted by the end of that 20-year period. So that's why we try to help folks avoid that line. And that's why the volatility can really matter in retirement. Now, we wanted to talk about compounding. We wanted to talk about sequence of returns risk and how all these things kind of interplay into each other. But then it's important to always make the distinction that you guys are federal employees and retirees. So one of the things that makes you different than most Americans is that you have a pension and you get to keep your health care for life. You get to have a FERS supplement if you're retiring before you're 62, fully eligible. Federal employees can take Social Security a lot earlier than most Americans because they have this pension. So the retirement planning starts to get a lot more nuanced and different when you're a federal worker. And so let's break it down. So take DHA Dave. He's 60 years old. He has 30 years of service. He makes $75,000 a year. His net take home per pay period is just shy of $1,600 per month. He has a high three of $72,000, and his Social Security at age 62 will be $1,800 per month. So when Dave looks at his gross income while he's working, it's $6,250. In retirement, it's $3,150 between his pension and his FERS supplement. That's a $3,000 a month gap on a gross basis. He's like, holy moly, this is a big difference. But we have to account for some deductions that change or go away in retirement. His TSP, he doesn't contribute to that in retirement. He'll keep his basic life, but he's going to drop his FEGLI option B. His taxes go down because he has lower gross income. He also doesn't pay Social Security or Medicare taxes in retirement. Now he's going to keep his FEHB, but when we look at his net income, instead of that difference being over $3,000 per month gross, it's only $1,135 net. So what is the implication of that? Well, only 50% of Dave's gross income is replaced by his pension and his Social Security or his FERS supplement. However, when we look on it on a net basis, 67% of his net income is replaced from his pension and Social Security, or pension plus his first supplement, net of all deductions, uh, without accounting for his retirement savings or his 401k. And so that shortfall is 33% of his net income that needs to be replaced, or about $1,135 per month. And so now that we know this number, we have to evaluate, hey, like, is that Dave's goal? And if that's his goal, if he says, hey, look, I'd like to live the same way I'm living now in retirement, how much do I need to have saved? Now we can start to give a real precise answer to that question. So we have that $1,135 amount. We keep that in our mind. And he says, hey, look, how much should I plan to withdraw from my accounts to bridge this gap? Well, we'd say, hey, consider this thing called the 4% rule. It was this rule of thumb created in the early 90s, and maybe some of you have heard of it, where the idea was that you could take out 4% from your account each year, and with market growth and with interest rates where they were, that money should last you throughout your entire retirement. Well, a lot has changed since the early 90s, right? Life expectancies are up, the market's different, interest rate environment's different, all kinds of things are different. And so a lot of places now, and a lot of folks, including us, tend to use more of a 3% rule, which is a more conservative withdrawal strategy. However, there's some implications to that. So in Dave's case, if he said, hey, look, I need $1,135 per month, that's $13,620 per year. Using the 3% rule, that would require a balance of about $454,000. However, this is the net number. So we have to then factor in taxes, right? You have to pay taxes in retirement. So when we tax affect that 1,135, it gets to about $1,300 per month. And so now Dave needs over $500,000 to bridge that gap using the 3% rule. And so if he says, hey, look, I need $1,306, that's going to, at the 3% rule, it's going to be $500,000. Maybe he doesn't have that. Maybe that's not enough saved, or maybe that's going to require a whole lot of his balance. He could instead use the 4%, but that's a little bit more of an aggressive withdrawal strategy. And one of the things that we help folks try to figure out is how can you set aside a lot less to achieve that same income while also being able to keep as much invested as possible as you want for the future, for legacy, for things like that. So I think these rules of thumb and one of the things our platform helps folks figure out is, hey, given my income goals, given my lifestyle goals that I want to achieve, how much money do I need to have to be comfortable to do that? And that's part of what our system will tell you in your score as well. So now that was one discrete example for Dave, right? He was 30 years of service. He was retiring at 60. Maybe he's thinking, does the amount that I need saved change, or how does that change over time, especially if my retirement date changes? So this red line shows Dave's current working income. So we're going to assume in all this case, just for ease of math, that just as much as he gets a COLA while he's working, there's cost of livings that come with Social Security, that come with his retirement and his pension. All these things adjust in relative tandem. So for any of those folks that might say, hey, have you considered this? We have. So Dave's currently taking home just shy of $3,500 per month net. So the longer he waits to retire, the greater his pension and his Social Security will be. And so what this graph shows is his pension and Social Security net of all estimated deductions, given different retirement ages. So it'll be lowest when he's 60, because his first supplement and his pension will be lowest. And the longer he keeps working, the longer he keeps working, the more his pension and his first supplement or Social Security would be. Now, the trade-off, of course, with this is that he has to keep working, right? So we can look here, and it looks like the crossover point's about age 65, age 66, but that's an extra 5-6+ years that he has to be working, which might mean that he has a shorter amount of time that he gets to be retired, right? Because we all have life expectancy. We all have that to consider. And so in Dave's case, if he says, hey, look, I would like to enjoy my retirement as much as possible. I'd like to live the way I'm living now. When is the best crossover? How much do I need to have saved? Well, using the 3% rule, we can estimate how much he would need to have saved at all these different times. So like I mentioned earlier, it was over $500,000 at age 60. But if he waits till age 62 using the 3% rule and these simple assumptions, he'd need about $200,000. If he used the 4% rule, he'd need even less. And using one of our recommendations or using our process, he might actually be able to retire a lot sooner than he thinks because he can put his money to work more efficiently and bridge that gap. So oftentimes we'll find folks that don't think that they have enough set aside to retire, and maybe they haven't sat down and done this math for themselves and really run these numbers. And that's something we try to help folks figure out every single day. So one of the really cool things about our platform is you can do this analysis for yourself. Once you've created your profile, you can slide the slider back and forth, and it'll tell you not only how big or small your retirement gap is relative to how much you're making right now, but it'll also tell you how on track you are based on your score. The higher your score, the more on track you'll be for retirement, and it factors in all of your assets as well. So let's talk about some key takeaways from tonight. One of the most important things is to just save as much as your budget allows. I was talking with a client about this today as well. And there's this really interesting dynamic where the more that you save of your paycheck, it's interesting. The less you're used to living on. And the less you're used to living on, the smaller that retirement income gap will be. And the smaller that retirement income gap will be, the easier it is, the less money it requires to bridge that gap. So the sooner you can retire. So it creates this very interesting compounding or virtuous cycle. It's also really important to determine what type of lifestyle you want to live in retirement. Uh, you know, hey, do you want to live the same way you're living now? Or are you trying to live even better than you're living now? Or are you expecting a big decrease? Try to plan for that ahead of time. Invest according to your risk tolerance. So make sure that you are exposing yourself to strong upside that you can tolerate and that's congruent with your plans. Create a retirement income gap plan is part and parcel to that. And then something we can help you with is by creating your account on app.goparco.com. That's a great place to get started. So a big question, a big takeaway is how do you want to live in retirement? Oftentimes that's, how do you make the most of the savings? Well, it's what's your end goal? And what's the type of lifestyle and what other legacy planning goals do you want to achieve as you go into your golden years? And you can see all of these numbers and do all this planning in one place. So as always, it was a pleasure to present to you all tonight. I'm happy to and looking forward to answering any and all questions that you have. And we've built the platform to help answer these retirement savings and lifestyle planning goals because we have so many folks who've been asking us for it. But the best thing you can do is just get started saving. And we've never worked with an individual who regretted having put more into their TSP or into their retirement savings. So with that, I'll open up for questions. And as always, it's a real pleasure to present to you all. And if there's any questions that you have or things you'd like us to expand on. Mark, would you mind? So Mark Gilkey asked a question about where to retire. Do you think you could expand on that question? Might be a jig. Yes, where? So really great question. So Mark's asking, where's the best places to retire in the United States? So my answer to that first is that we've worked with a lot of federal employees and a lot of retirees. And many of them have said, hey, look, I'm moving from Maryland down to Florida, or I'm moving from Boston down to Tennessee because the cost of living is lower. And it very well might be. And cost of living is very important. However, there is, I think, a hierarchy. If you live next to your grandkids or to your kids or next to family and you like them and your family and your social life is close by, moving down somewhere else might save you some money in the like on a monthly basis. But I have folks that we work with that really, but are spending tons of money on airline tickets and Airbnbs and rental cars because they're up here 4 or 5 times a year hanging out with their grandkids. And I think a lot of those, if they really looked at it, would say, "Man, I really wish that I had just stayed down the street from my grandkids and figured out how to, um, you know, figured out how to make it work. Figure out either live with my kids or live close by or downsize because being close to family can be worth a lot. In terms of cost of living stuff, um, so it's certainly like there's certain states that anybody can talk to um, have much lower cost of living, and certainly there's ones that are very high cost of living, where it can be really really challenging to retire. But I've really tried to evaluate, if you're trying to be cost conscious about where you're going to be, really spend the time thinking about what you want to do in retirement. Um, really think about what you want to do in retirement. If it's, hey, I want to be close to family or I want to be able to spend time with my grandkids, then you're going to have to probably be close to where those grandkids are. Um, Otherwise, you're going to end up spending a lot in other places to go see it, um, or family. There's a question about, do we work with military retirees that are also federal employees? We do. Um, so we'd love to chat with them, or if there's somebody that you think would be helpful, or if it's you, schedule a time with Lauren or set up an account on our platform, and and we'll talk to you and help you out. You found this helpful? There's a lot to talk about when it comes to retirement savings and making sure that you've got things on track. So if there's more that you'd like us to expound on, we'd always love to know that. But we always want to make things as digestible and understandable for folks as possible.